This is Rebel Culture.
All right, right. We're ready. Okay, we are the next generation of the Mangrove9, and my name is, thank you, my name is Yinka Inniss-Charles.
And my name is Jamila Bolton-Gordon.
And our fathers were the Mangrove9. I'm not sure if many people are aware of who the Mangrove9 were. Some of you may have seen the film Mangrove by Steve McQueen on the BBC. Well, that's the Mangrove. And my dad was one of the Mangrove defendants. He was Anthony Inniss.
My dad also equally was one of the defendants, and he was Bolton-Gordon.
Okay, so the Mangrove trial was probably one of the most significant trials 50 years ago. In 1970, it all started when there was a lot of racism in London, especially in West London, and particularly in an area where a restaurant called the Mangrove, where a lot of the black Caribbeans and Africans who came over at the time would kind of congregate and feel safe and stick together. This restaurant was continuously harassed by the police. Didn't matter what they'd done, they just were harassing them, saying they were doing this, they were doing that, and it was obviously due to the color of their skin. There was a lot of quite powerful activists at the time. Well, whether they knew there was activists at the time, but they were trying to fight back and stick up for their rights. They were being continuously harassed.
Well, also, I think that the interesting thing about this situation, well, particularly unique to West London and the borough of High Street, and the borough of Kensington and Chelsea, is that it's a very complex area in the sense that it has, although they omit migrants into the area, the history of the 200 years of that area is North Kensington is the poorer area. And that's where, when our parents came over, they put most migrants in the poorer areas of any borough, basically. And Notting Hill is at the top, and the North Kensington is at the bottom. So the history of North Kensington is the pig farm, and it's also famous for its clay, and it has an underground river. So that's just the initial backdrop of it. But when our parents came in the 40s, originally, in the 40s were obviously the World War I veterans. We had black people, all kind of people of color who were resident in that area. But then we had the migrations of the Spanish, the French, and then the Caribbean came over along with the Irish. Now, with that backdrop, with very poor housing, Labrador was being rebuilt really at that point. You found that we had people like Enoch Powell, and we had the Teddy Boys, and we had a lot of Harold Wilson was the main prime minister then, and they felt that since the rich didn't want to move into that poorer part of the area because of the stench and because of the history of it, they would put the migrants in there, and then they brutalized the migrants in there. Because when you mix migrants with original residents who are already poor, it's what do you call it? Tinderbox. And the Teddy Boys and then everybody else behind them felt that it was an insult because they were coming to take their housing, take their women, take their schooling, take their jobs. So we had this kind of negativity that our parents had to deal with. Now, moving forward, once our parents came from a place that they were already struggling for, employment, housing, better education, they came here on that golden ticket, whether it's by the plane or the boat.
My dad came by the plane.
My mum came by the plane. My dad came by the boat, and my mum still says there's a hierarchy. Well, I came on the plane. So
my dad actually came over as a child. He was only about 12 or 13 years of age when he came over to join his grandaunts, which was a kind of typical thing at that time where people
Parents
in the Caribbean would send the old elders of the families. I think it happens in quite a few cultures to go over to the UK for, they say, a better education. Well, I'm not sure about that anymore. But that was the kind of way they thought it was going to happen.
Well, the wives and the children would come after the men.
After, yeah.
Once the men would find, some place of residence and work, then you would find financially be able to bring your family over, you know, stage by stage.
And there was always supposed to be going back home, but there's some of them are still
5-year
here.
plan.
Still here now,
60
fighting
years
for the
later.
Windrush.
Now, what happened in the sense of Ladbroke Grove is that there was a kind of disconnect between the young people as well and their parents, because what the older generation would find themselves collectively understanding and doing is having their official meetings, official groups, but those groups were disconnected to what the young people were actually facing on the street. Now, on the street, you had police who were very agitated about seeing us starting to develop our economical businesses. So when we start developing, because every culture comes in, you need to have your economical setting so that you can develop your area, develop your business, develop your educational settings, be completely independent financially. So once we started doing that, that became a problem. And then there's obviously a disconnect and in not understanding who we are and why we're here. So with that situation, we found that the police were passive in watching the Teddy Boys disrupt us. And very lenient
brutally
to
attack us.
Women and children, we found from the stories of the elders and the Windrush.
And also with, I just want to say that some of the, but also a lot of the mixed race relationships that were going on then, like my parents, that was even worse. You know, you could be a white lady and you would also get harassed or attacked due to the fact that you was with a black man. Or you had mixed race children. So it was kind of everybody, really.
Double whammy.
Yeah. And that's where the no blacks, no dogs, no Irish came into effect as well.
Yeah. Now, with this particular instance with Mangrove9, because of the continuous brutality, continuous harassment of young, especially young black men, being held up, being shaken down, as they used to say in those days, being arrested or falsely charged of, certain, I won't say accusations, but certain things that they thought that they could get away with charging them. You found that engulfed a kind of emotional hatred. Because if somebody keeps brutalizing you, eventually it's a tinderbox, you were going to fight back. So with the restaurants, and not only just Frank's businesses, there was a backdrop where you had the intellectual hubs in Portobello Road, and you also had that in All Saints Road. Both of them were eating areas. Both of them also had intellectual support mechanisms for the community. In other words, you had housing consultants, in terms of immigration, in terms of social deprivation, in terms of economics.
A safe place, because a lot of the people who used to be, a lot of the young black boys as well at the time were being stopped by police or hunted down. I don't know if you saw the film where they would chase them. It was a bit of fun. Catch the, nigger, I hate to say the word, but that's how it was.
Spook, wog.
And, a lot of times they would beat them up in the police stations.
Or in the van.
In the van, yeah, and then kind of let them out. So
warm them up in the van, they used to say.
Yeah. So it was already kind of building up where people were kind of trying to stick together in trying to solve it. So, one of the famous words, I suppose, is that you hear, which is probably by Darkus initially in the trial, by Althea, you would hear her talking when she would say they went to the police, nothing was done. They went to the MPs, nothing was done. So it felt like they were trying to get a fair system to make complaints to the police or to the MPs saying that they're being harassed by the police. This was most black boys at the time. It wasn't just the Mangrove restaurant, but because the Mangrove restaurant in West London was the place where most of them would go to feel safe in that community on All Saints Road, that's why they targeted the Mangrove restaurant, because that was the place where everyone would kind of go to feel safe.
Not just that, Yinks, you forgot. It's a Trini thing as well.
Yeah, and a Trini thing. So I'm half Trini, so writing up Jamila. Yeah, so it's kind of a lot of Trinidadians and Grenadians, kind of East Caribbeans. They would go to the Mangrove to eat food and, to just feel safe and look out for each other. And All Saints Road, was a safe place. As a child growing up, I remember my mum and my dad used to take us on that road. After it became, they said it was notorious, but it wasn't when I was younger. It was a place where you felt safe and your children could kind of like, run outside, and it is a black community, but also the white, because
it was mixed. It was a mixed community.
I mean, even though some people say black power or whatever, it wasn't like that. It was about equality. It was about fighting for, against racism. So, speeding on, because we don't want to start going into too deep, this is how eventually the demonstration in August 1970 happened, where they decided they had enough, and they were going to do something about it. So initially it was supposed to be a peaceful demonstration where they just wanted to march up to the police station in Harrow Road. 2 police stations, Notting Hill and Harrow Road.
And Harrow Road.
Not in Hell and Harrow Road. Right. Just to, show that they've had enough. They wanted some kind of justice. Visual. They wanted to make some kind of noise. But it ended up turning into as you can see, quite a violent demonstration. The police got a bit aggressive. There was fighting. So they arrested quite a few people who were demonstrating at the time. But equally, it was over-manned. So in other words, you had 150 plus demonstrators and 600 plus police. So what happened through that is that once and then also they had plainclothes police in there. You had other forms of sergeants that are in there that were obviously doing their, what do you call that? When you investigate and take up information about these particular individuals who you're targeting. So once they accumulated their information, then they antagonized, and then it became a fighting situation. Some people fighting for their lives in that particular situation. Some of the Mangrove9 were rounded up not on the day, but afterwards they were rounded up. Others were rounded up 6-7 weeks afterwards. There's a couple of pictures you'll see in the next door where Althea, who was the head of the Panthers or organised the Panthers, they don't give women credit for that. I'm sorry, I have to say, powerful women. Big up to
very powerful women.
Barbara Beese and Althea Jones-LaQuante, still alive, by the way. All of our parents, majority of the parents, maybe one might be still alive, one male. I've passed away, unfortunately, but Barbara Beese and Althea Jones are still alive and kicking, strong.
They were at the Chelsea Garden show when we infiltrated the or disrupted it positively.
Made a statement. We destroyed the Old Bailey in 1970, and we're back again, making a landmark in the Queen's Garden.
And I just want to say significantly before we end as well, is that the reason why the trial is quite infamous is the fact that, one, it was 55 days, the longest trial ever in the Old Bailey. 2, that you also had, it was over £1 million in our money today. 3, it was the first time that they'd asked for an all-black jury of their peers through the Magna Carta, be tried by your peers.
And if you're not aware about the Magna Carta is the law of the land. So
12th century.
It's, some of the defendants were represented by the barristers or solicitors, and then initially 2 of the members, it was just Althea and Darcus, represented themselves, and then Bolton-Gordon, which is Jamila's dad, then also decided to represent himself. So they played a little tactic of some of them would be the Magna Carta way, and some of them would be, the judicial, which played a big part. And at the time, it was quite shocking for the Old Bailey, because they thought, who the hell do you think you are? Coming into here and thinking you got some intelligence. So they were very brave and intelligent at that time. Because to think that someone would actually decide to stand up, I think most people are scared to do that even now, to stand up in court and say, I ignore all of your laws on the land, I am not going to follow you. So to me, it's an amazing thing. It just shows you how powerful and how strong the Mangrove9 defendants were at the time.
And they were still brutalized within the court case.
Yeah, still beaten up and like
downstairs in the cells, holding cells, they were still brutalized. But they had a very strong, powerful community. Yeah. They had the rich, they had the famous, they had everybody from every quarter supporting them, because everybody realized at that point it was not just political, but it's almost like how we had what's his name?
George Floyd.
And
everybody kind of came together.
In the globe came together, because you can see a blatant injustice. And that's what I liked about the community, that everybody came together.
And initially, because I know we're running out of time, it started off in the Magistrates Court, and then they were kind of let off. And then for some reason, a few weeks later down the line, was it a year down the line, they decided to take them. So that was 1970, the demonstration, and they went to the magistrates court in 1970.
So a year and a half later.
And also later, in 1971, they decided to bring the case back for some reason and take them to the Old Bailey. So it was a very significant case, and a lot of legislation came after. Like the Race Relations Act,
Equal Opportunities
came from this, Black UK history that most people don't know about. And the Mangrove9 himself in the Old Bailey, it went on for the 55 days.
Yeah, I was saying that.
They won the case, as far as I'm concerned, because even though some of them got suspended sentences, even though they'd done nothing. Because I'm just telling you, my dad did not do what they said, right? He was brutally beaten up, I know that much. And harassed for the rest of his life, all the time he spent in the UK. But, the most significant thing I would say that came from the case was what we have now that most people don't know about in the legislation that goes on now to protect us. And
also, I think what it shows for me is that when they had the American Panthers come down and show our parents how to organize yourself, the most important thing they said, and I think we've lost that to some extent, is to have a hub in every area. It doesn't matter if you're Manchester, Liverpool, Bristol, wherever, where you are separate from the government, but you are communicating about all your situations that are quite similar in every area where there is a cultural mix. And we started that. I think my dad started that with the People's Information Centre, and then we had the first black law firm in the country just up the road. So there was, and also some significant lawyers came from that trial and went on, like Mansfield to do Stephen Lawrence, learned a lot from that trial as youngsters. Ian MacDonald, Tony Mohip, a lot of them. So there were some significant elements of that trial that are still prominent today. And you could,
and I think it's important to go and research, go and find out about the Mangrove9, find out about your UK black history.
And get it in the education
We can
system.
also say, though, I'm going to quickly say this because I know that she said running out of time. As much as the case was a triumph, we brought into all the laws to protect us as we are now. And we know that sometimes it's not followed, and no one's really overseeing the Equality Acts, or no one really oversees what's going on in their organisations, whether there's institutionalised racism going on. Because I always question who oversees it. You bring in the laws, but who's watching it? As we know, nobody is. It's just an act that they brought in to pretend. So what I'm going to say on that on that point, it's true. I don't care. Tell me anybody who knows who oversees it. One thing I was going to say as well, apart from that, is just that us as the children, me and Jamila, and there's quite a few of the Mangrove9 families. We're moving on, spreading the word, because also it wasn't just about a significant triumph. Our parents paid a price for that. The aftermath of what our families went through and what they went through
was ugly.
It was ugly. My dad went back to Trinidad. He couldn't take it no more. He's also a lot of them suffered from mental health, from post-depression, trauma, and depression. Some of them became alcoholics and drank themselves to death. So you don't take on the judicial system, the Old Bailey, and then you do walk away.
There's always going to be a price.
So we're going on to tell the story. We've got a few things coming out, maybe a little documentary that will be going on, telling the story of the aftermath of the children, what we suffered in the 70s growing up. But it made us strong, We're strong, powerful sisters sitting here.
And there's some powerful brothers. And also going forward, what I ideally would like to see is a re-established unification of everybody, understanding what your rights are, who you are, where you come from, and not his story, but our story.
Yeah. So I'll just say, unity in the house, equality for everybody, and we must keep fighting for that. Don't give in, especially in the organizations. Institutionalized racism is the biggest thing. I see it from both sides. I'm in organizations, I see it from us black sisters sometimes as well, where I'm standing up, opening my big mouth, and they're just looking at me like, you're a troublemaker. So, and I see
don't
some
highlight
white pairs
on our part.
who will stick up for me, So it's about, we need to speak up. It doesn't matter what color you are. If you don't speak up, nothing can be done. We can sit and we can moan. We can talk about racism. We can talk about Priti Patel. bringing in extra flipping stop and search just to harass us even more.
Or sending us to Rwanda.
Yeah.
But we
exactly.
just need to be speaking up. That's the point. Going forward, otherwise we can continually be brutalized, and our children we'll lose our children if we don't.
And the next generations, as you see them going on now, everybody's mixed with everything. I don't think, in my days it was like, oh, I'm Irish and Trini, black and white. There wasn't much mix going on.
Now you're like, what
now
are
it's
you
like
mixed with?
I'm Cuban, I'm Irish, I'm Asian, I'm this, I'm Egyptian, I'm whatever. So, we're mixing anyway, but it's important not just to be mixing with your partners and saying, oh, I'm of all different cultures.
Understanding the culture of who you're with.
Exactly, because your children or the next children down the line are the ones that will suffer. And we shouldn't have to keep suffering because we're educated enough now to know what really goes on inside organizations or around the world. But anyway, we just want to say thank you to everybody who's come.
Power to the people.
Power to the people, to everyone, unity amongst us. And we decide we're going to spread the word. We're going to keep moving. Maybe they'll lock us up as well. I don't know.
And just very important, women, we have a really important role, just very quickly in the last minute. We, as you know, we give birth to men and women. How we represent ourselves is how we're going to magnify that kind of aura to the next population of men and women. If we do not center ourselves and project ourselves in a certain way, we cannot criticize our men, we cannot criticize our ladies. So if we continue to learn about ourselves and also educate ourselves before we educate anybody else, or before we think that we can ask anything of anybody else, we have to make sure that we are sending out the right messages.
And it's okay to get it wrong. We all are human. We all make mistakes.
Just admit it.
But the most important thing, no, it's true. The most important thing is that we recognize it, even if we're faults in us that growing up from childhood, because we've all been through different traumas or whatever, and our adults
own it and recognize
we change from the children, from what we went through. But it's about owning it. All right, it's about owning it and recognizing it and finding ways to change it. And it doesn't happen overnight. But as long as you know and you recognize, change will come.
Don't forget the love.
Love, yeah. Peace and love.